Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm reviewing the new album from Mike Shinoda of Linkin Park, Post Traumatic. This is a follow-up to the Post Traumatic EP that we got a few months ago. Actually, all three songs from that EP are included here on this album. My review of that EP is included in my Linkin Park related playlist on my channel, which is linked in the description down below, and it will be up on the screen here at the end of the video. So if you want to click on that at the end of the video, that's also fine. If you want to see my review of that EP, you want to hear my thoughts on those three tracks when they dropped, as well as if you want to see my reviews of any of Linkin Park's other albums, I have reviewed them all, or my I believe it was top 10 Linkin Park songs that I did around a year ago, I believe, at this point. And speaking of around a year ago, it's been almost a year now since the passing of Chester Bennington of Linkin Park. And the reason I bring this up is because that's really what is the big inspiration or influence on this album's creation right here. Of course, Chester was a big part of Linkin Park and a great friend to Mike Shinoda, who was also in Linkin Park. And after his unfortunate death last July, many people, myself included, given that I'm a Linkin Park fan, were just, left sad. So when Mike dropped the post-traumatic EP back in January, about a half a year after the death of Chester, I was very, interested to see what it had going for it, and I did really like the EP. I liked how Mike was able to go into detail about his life up to that point over the past half a year or so, talk about everything that had gone on, including, the whole concert that Linkin Park had in honor of Chester and all of that. It was just a very interesting EP, and I very much liked it. I like getting to hear Mike's more personal take on things. It's not an EP I returned to a ton over the past few months, not because I don't like it, but because it's just so, heavy in terms of its subject matter. It's not something that I would listen to, to brighten up my day or anything, but that's, kind of what you would expect, honestly. And that's kind of what I expected from this whole album going into it. I didn't expect it to be a super happy project or anything. I expected it to be much of the same as the EP. And to an extent, that is what we got here. Pretty much all of this album really kind of deals with Mike moving forward following Chester's death, reflecting on that, and stepping in a new direction, I guess you could say. There are some lighter moments on this project as well, not super happy or sunshiny moments or anything quite like that are just going to make you super happy or anything, but there are moments on here that have more hope and more optimism to them than some of the other tracks, particularly some of the tracks that we got on the EP, which I think works for this album overall, because given that this thing is around 50 minutes in runtime, if it was just 50 minutes of just very depressing songs, that could work. It could be a good project, but it would also be a very draining listen. And like I said, the EP itself, I was only around, 3 tracks, about 10 minutes-ish, I believe, and that was also a very draining experience on its own. So, for the entire album to be like that, I feel like, it would just be very, depressing, I guess you could say. So I'm happy that Mike decided to throw in some more optimistic things in there. Not that it also just doesn't make sense for there to be some optimism in here as well, as Mike is also trying to move on during this album. He's not just reflecting on the past, he's kind of looking forward to the future and seeing what he's going to be able to do, and including really this album as well. He reflects on this thing multiple times, including on tracks like Crossing a Line in particular, where he's kind of talking about moving forward into a new direction, which of course could be a representation of this project here, given that this is his first album released under his own name. And I do like how he did that, because it does make it seem like this is, not a Fort Minor project or just some other name or anything. It's Mike Shinoda himself. It's a very personal project, and that's reflected in the name of, the artist making it. It just makes sense, in my opinion. The album starts with the 3 tracks from the EP, which are some of the more, darker, more depressing tracks, I guess you could say, talking about the concert that they had for Chester in his honor, and Mike kind of talking about how he's unsure if he's going to be able to perform well because of just all the emotions that he had, and that despite all the practice that he may do with his band, he's just unsure of what's going to happen when the moment comes to do the actual thing. Will the memories catch up to him and just get to him when he's trying to perform or just do something there? I commended the storytelling in my initial review of the EP, and I still stand by that now. These 3 tracks are still fantastic, and they're a great start to the album. I like how it starts off a bit darker before moving in more into some of these tracks that also, while reflecting on the past, also start to move in a new direction, like I mentioned before. I really do feel like these 3 tracks at the beginning that we got earlier in the EP are kind of like their own little thing before moving on to the rest of the album that we got later on. Not to say that it's really not connected to the rest of the album anyway, or that there's a lack of unity in this project overall. The project feels very cohesive overall, and I'm just really saying how it feels like it gets, it's just telling kind of a story throughout. Not necessarily that there is a narrative being told, throughout, like track 1 leads into track 2, leads into track 3, or anything like that. But there are some overarching themes and concepts throughout this thing, and I just feel like it makes sense to start out with those 3 tracks from the EP. After these 2 tracks, we have the song Nothing Makes Sense Anymore, which is really just Mike kind of reflecting on how after this, he's just kind of left unsure of what to do with himself. He just doesn't know. Nothing makes sense to him, as you might be able to tell by the title of the song. He's unsure what he's going to do with his band. He's unsure what he's going to do with his music career. He's just unsure where his life is going to go in general at this point, because not only did he have to deal with losing one of his best friends, and have to deal with, all of the emotions, all that, but also now he has to worry about where his band, his music career, his source of, living, what that's going to do going forward, which has to be very stressful for someone as well, to have, a very successful band, and now all of a sudden one of the people in that band that was just, a very beloved person in that group, and a big part of that group, who was also your best friend, to have that person just gone, that has to affect you in more ways than one, and I like how this album showcases that. The track About You also kind of expands on this more, how it kind of seems how, like, everything just that he does almost seems to be about Chester and everything, though he kind of seems to be also hoping that that's not the case, that, people take some of the tracks on this album as not necessarily being about Chester, but also being about, moving forward and some of these other themes I talked about before. The track Hold It Together is another one that sees Mike just trying to keep his life held together despite all the bad things going on in the past year or so. I particularly like some of the storytelling on this track, particularly in the second verse, where he's kind of talking about being at like a 6-year-old's birthday party. I'm guessing like someone that he knows, like a family person or a friend or something, and how everyone there is trying to, sympathize with him because of just everything that's been going on in his life, and like how it just kind of seems to mess up with how he's feeling, because of course he's at like a 6-year-old's birthday party, which is just, something very innocent and very happy, because of course someone who's like 6 years old is very young. They have really not much of an understanding about things like death and, just the big impact that something like that could have on Mike's career. So this is like a very innocent, more upbeat place for him to be, I guess you could say. And then here come people who will have good intentions. They just want to comfort him and sympathize with him, but it just kind of messes up how he's feeling at the time, and how he just feels like bringing it up here is just not the appropriate place to do so. It's interesting hearing him tell stories like this on this album, and I just found that to be one of the standouts lyrically on the project. The closing track, Can't Hear You Now, is another one that has good lyrics, I feel. This one's kind of haunting. It feels at times almost like it's more from the perspective of Chester than it is from Mike, which is kind of creepy to think about, but at the same time, I do feel like having that be the closer does tie together the themes of this album very nicely. It's an album that lyrically deals a lot with reflecting on the past, all the bad things that's happened, but is also about moving on from those things and starting anew, which is something that I very like. I like how this isn't just a, super depressing album or anything quite like that. I like how it does have its moments of hope and moving on in here as well. Not that those moments are particularly upbeat or super happy or anything. I wouldn't expect them to be, but I do get some glimmers of hope on this project, which is something that I enjoy seeing. As for Mike's rapping on this project, it's not exactly super complex or anything quite like that. It's more straightforward and to the point, I would say, but I feel like that works well here on this project, given that he's really just trying to convey his emotions. He's just trying to just get his feelings out there, tell some stories in the process. It makes sense, in my opinion, for him to just have this more straightforward approach to his rapping, and I feel like it helps just get his point across here, which I just think is a good thing overall. His rapping on this project is good, I would say. His singing on this project is another thing I really liked as well. Of course, he's sung in Linkin Park before, but I really like his singing here as well. There's some tracks on this thing which are mostly singing, and don't really have as much rapping on them. For example, Promises I Can't Keep, which at times feels like it could almost fit into a Linkin Park album, possibly if you were to maybe add some more like rock elements into it at times, just because it's mostly singing. I like the track overall. I think it's very solid, and Mike singing throughout this thing is good as well. I mean, I've always thought he's been a good singer on Linkin Park projects, as well as his Fort Minor stuff, and here he's just showcasing his many talents again. It's also very impressive how Mike provides a lot of the instrumentation on this project as well. In the production on this project, the instrumentals that he's rapping or singing over are very nice, very diverse, but at the same time not, all over the place and scatterbrained exactly. Lots of times they do have a sadder feel to them. They're very, at times, not overbearing or in your face, which makes sense given that, like I said, this is an album for Mike to share his feelings, what he's been going through the past year or so, to tell these stories. And I like how not really any of the instrumentals really get in the way of, understanding what he's saying or anything quite like that. They're there, they're good, they have a variety of sounds to them. Some of them are more rock-oriented. For example, the track Running From My Shadow, which is just a very, more rock-oriented track with some guitars thrown in there. You have some ones on here that are more just hip-hop oriented, I guess you could say. Not exactly in a more modern sense of the word, not really like a trappy kind of hip-hop, more of just a alternative sort of hip-hop, a more just sadder, more gloomy type of alternative hip-hop, I guess you could say. It doesn't really get in the way of what Mike is saying, like I mentioned before, and I think that's the important part here. The instrumentals are very nice, they match the tone of the song that they're a part of very nicely, but they never really get in the way or become overbearing of the lyrical messages, which is probably what a lot of people going into this album are going to want to hear, considering if you're listening to this album, you're probably a pretty big Linkin Park fan, and you probably want to hear Mike's perspective on his life in the past year or so. As far as the features go on this project, I was interested to see that this project had as many features as it did. It's not an overbearing amount of features by any means, but I was still surprised that, a project that I thought was going to be very personal, and it is very personal, I just want to say that now, was going to have as many features on it as it did. Though mostly I feel like the features on here were pretty decent. I don't think that they're the highlight of the project by any means, but they're not exactly bad either, I would say. There are some that I like more than others, however. For example, on the track Liftoff, this track is one that I like overall. I do like the just atmosphere the track has going for it, the slower pacing, I guess you could say. Mike's rapping on it is very good. And there's two features on this track. The first of those is Chino Moreno of the Deftones, another kind of alternative metal band that was was very popular around the time Linkin Park started blowing up. I really like this group, particularly their album White Pony. I think that's a fantastic album. So having this feature on here I thought was going to be very interesting to see, and I really liked it overall. He provides the chorus here on this track, and it's just this very spacey type feel that I really enjoy, and I think it adds a lot to the track, and it's one of the features that I really like. And I especially like seeing another person that's kind of from the the same scene almost as Linkin Park back when they first appeared onto the scene, having a feature on this album. I just thought that was cool overall. And the other feature on here is Machine Gun Kelly, who I'm not really a fan of by any means, but I do know that I believe he was on tour with Linkin Park during the One More Light tour, which is when Chester, unfortunately passed away. So I figured that, even though I wasn't really a big fan of him, that maybe he'd have some sort of interesting perspective to bring to the lyrics on this track. So I was interested to see what he was going to do. And I'm a little disappointed with it because I feel like his lyrics didn't really have all too much interesting to them. He just kind of provides a verse that doesn't really, at least in my own opinion, connect all too much with Chester or moving forward or anything quite like that. It's just kind of about his own life, not like in a narcissistic sort of way, but it just kind of felt a little bit off topic, honestly. But though I will say that I do like the sound of his verse overall. Like the way that he flows on his verse is nice. I enjoyed it. And when I'm not really paying attention all too much to the lyrics all that much, it still feels solid, honestly. Not to say that the lyrics are awful either, they're fine for what they are, but I kind of wish that he was a bit more on topic, I guess you could say, with the rest of the themes and concepts of the album. I don't know, maybe I just wasn't looking at the lyrics the right way when I was, reading through them while listening to the album. Maybe there are connections there that I just didn't get, but it just felt a little off topic to me. Still was a decent feature in my opinion though, and the track is still a pretty good one overall. I feel like the track on here, Make It Up As I Go, which features K-Flay, is one of the weaker moments on this project. Not that necessarily that's an awful song or anything like that, but it just felt a bit like it could have been cut out of the track listing, and they still could have kept the album's greater themes and best parts intact. It's just probably my least favorite song overall, but it's not an awful track by any means. Overall, I would say that Post Traumatic is a very good album. In fact, I'd be willing to say that it's a great album. It really delivered exactly what I wanted from it. And that was Mike sharing where he's been in the past year or so, and just talking about where he feels like he's going to have to do moving forward in his own life. I like some of the bits of hope here on this album. I like how Mike is able to do so many things on this project, whether that be rapping, storytelling, singing, or providing the instrumentation for these tracks. He really is a really talented guy, and it shows here on this project with what he's able to deliver here. A full-length project where he does a lot of this stuff on here and is able to deliver not necessarily a story, I would say, but he's able to have lots of reoccurring themes, messages, as well as, deliver many stories that have occurred to him over the past year or so, and I really like that overall. Like I said, I'm a big Linkin Park fan. Of course, Chester's death was something very tragic and affected me, but of course it wouldn't affect me or any other big Linkin Park fans nearly as much as it would affect people like Mike, who knew Chester, were bandmates, good friends for many decades, and it really shows with an album like this. The circumstances surrounding the creation of this project are definitely unfortunate. There are things that I'd rather not, I wish that they wouldn't have happened, I guess you could say. I'd rather still Chester be here rather than have this album, but still, that's not the way the world happened to work, I guess, in this reality. So we got this album instead. And, it's still a great album. And if you're a Linkin Park fan, if you like Mike's work, his Fort Minor work as well, I think you're going to like this project, because not only does the subject matter, is it really, something that you're going to connect with if you are a Linkin Park fan, but also the sounds of this project. Like I said, it doesn't sound a ton like a Linkin Park album, I guess you could say, but it has elements in it that I guess you could say are, reminiscent of some of Mike's parts on other Linkin Park albums. His rapping, his singing, some of the sounds in the production here. It's just a good album overall, I would say. I really enjoyed it, though I'm not sure if it's an album that I would listen to, repeatedly over and over again, just because it is still a very sad listen given the subject matter. But it is an album that I do really enjoy. It's definitely an album that is going to probably appear somewhere on my favorite albums of the year list come the end of 2018. But yeah, if you're a Linkin Park fan, you definitely need to check this album out. If you're not a Linkin Park fan, if you never really liked any of their material, I'm not sure how this album is really going to appeal to you. Maybe you'll like it if you're a hip-hop fan still, but if you don't really have much of a connection to the subject matter that's being talked about here, maybe you won't be able to connect to it quite as much as Linkin Park fans will. But still, it's an album worth checking out if you like hip-hop music, I guess you could say. It's overall a great album, like I said, and it's worth your time. With that said, that is my review of this album. It is just my own personal opinion. If you happen to dislike this project, if you love this project, regardless of what your opinion is, it's perfectly okay. Feel free to leave your opinions on this album in the comment section down below, and leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this review for more music-related content. Like I said, my review of the Post Traumatic EP, as well as all my Linkin Park album reviews and content, is linked in the description down below and will be up on screen here at the end of the video. Thank you guys for watching, and stay golden.